Just checking. Sorry to interrupt, sir. I can't hear anything. I don't know if anybody else
I
can.
I can't hear either. I was just gonna say something as well.
Yeah, I was on mute, so that explains a lot. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right, so tonight's topic is 4.18 financial returns. Our enabling objectives are complete all documents necessary to submit monthly financial returns using the DoD FMR Volume 5, generate all documents necessary to submit monthly financial returns using the DoD FMR Volume 5, and distribute those returns. We're going to talk about completing the documents. We're going to talk about generating additional documents from the system and where do those documents go at the end of the month and into the quarter, end of the year. Our references is the volume 5, of course, and the P485, chapter 10. All right, our discussion points. We're going to talk about the monthly statement of accountability, SF-1219. We're going to talk about the message statement of accountability and report of disbursements and collections. We're going to talk about the schedule of deposit activity, detailed analysis of cash and other assets, month-end check issue summary, the SF-1179, check issue transmittal, and the distribution of documents. It's a lot of stuff, but it's not going to take us too long. We're going to spend most of our time on the 1219. What questions do we have before we get started? All right, nothing heard, so moving on. The monthly statement of accountability, SF-1219, I encourage you to pull that up and look at it. When you're looking at it, you'll notice that it looks a little similar to the 2657. So it has similar names on those line items and similar numbers. And that is because it is a summary document of the 2657. It is an aggregate for the transaction period or the accounting period. And so typically that's going to be the end of the month. Who can give me an example of when it would not be the end of the month? So when do we close out an accounting period that is not the end of the month? Right, a good example of when you would do that would be if you are transferring over accountability. So if you are the new dispersing officer coming in, the previous dispersing officer would close out possibly in the middle of the month. And that would close out that period. The SF-1219 is prepared and submitted monthly, and it goes to DFAS no later than the first workday after the reporting period. So as you'll notice with most of our classes, you have a period after the end of the month to turn everything in. And this one is the first workday after the end of the reporting period. For when you are mailing these in, it's going to be the postmark date, not when it gets there, actually. The SF-1219 is produced by NFRS, which is the program that you manage all this dispersing stuff through. And that's important because it is almost 100% automated to get here. So if you have input any transactions wrong throughout the entirety of the month, it will show up in this summary that gets sent off to DFAS. So that might mess up your lines of accounting, and then you will have to go back and do corrections to it for the next submission. And everybody knows that rework takes a lot more time than doing something right the first time. So go through and double check all your transactions before closing out at the end of the month. All right, so before we talked about if you are turning over the dispersing office to another dispersing officer, that closes out a period. When that happens, the final will be typed on the top of the form, and you will keep that for your retained returns. It is an inspectable item. And that is just making sure that the accountability of one dispersing officer is officially closed out with DFAS, and a new accountability is opened up for the new dispersing officer. What questions do we have so far about the SF 1219? All right, so now we're going to go through and look at each one of the line items. So part A of the 1219, if you're looking at it, it is transfers during period affecting accountability. And this is our translation of section 1 of the 2657. Our line 1 is our previous period accountability. And then we have line 2.1, which is our checks issued to US Treasury. And this combines 2.1 alpha and 2.1 bravo from the 2657. Who can tell me what 2.1 alpha is? And you can throw it in the chat, or you can shout it out.
Check issued for voucher transaction.
Absolutely. Checks issued in payment of vouchers. So our voucher transaction. What is 2.1 bravo?
Checks issued all others. The exchange for cash checks.
Perfect. It's our exchange for cash checks. All right. And these items are combined, and this number will also match up to our SF 1179 that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's talking about our month-end check issue summary. That's what it's called, and pretty self-explanatory what it is. It's a list of all the checks that we've issued throughout the reporting period. So these numbers should match, or it won't let you close out. Continuing on part A, which corresponds to our section 1 of the 2657, our lines 2.34 and 2.36 we do not use. Our line 2.37 is used when shutting down a dispersing officer. So it says it's not used by afloat dispersing officers, but not all dispersing officers are afloat. 2.39 is not used. And then 2.9 is our subtotal. And so our 2.9, that is our sum total, is just 2.1 through 2.39. And then our line 3.0 is our line 1 plus our 2.9. Line 4.1 is simply our net disbursements. And what line does this correspond to on the 2657? If you had to guess.
Is it 4.1C?
Close. It's the 4.1 Foxtrot, our net expenditures. So our net disbursements, net expenditures, those are interchangeable. Or exchangeable for this. So 4.1 Foxtrot on the 2657 equals 4.1 on the SF 1219. All right, line 4.2 is our deposits presented or mailed to bank. It's our totals for 4.2 Alpha and 4.2 Bravo, which we only use our 4.2 Alpha, our deposits presented or mailed to bank. 4.34 and 4.36 not used, so that makes that easy. And our 4.37 is another one if we're closing a dispersing office. That is the only time it will be used. You'll see that it says transfers from other dispersing officers. Don't confuse that with an exchange for cash check. Again, that is only if you are closing down a dispersing office. Our line 4.9 is simply 4.1 through 4.39. And then our line 5.0 is our 3. 4.9 minus 3. Oh, I forgot to mention. Well, now's a good time to mention. Part 1 corresponds to Section 1 of the 2657, but Part B corresponds to Section 2 of the 2657. And this part is really straightforward. You look at all the columns that we used on the 2657, all the rows, and then you'll just write those over on the SF 1219. These are very easy to compare and transfer over. So it has items on the SF 1219 like cash on hand, undeposited collections, loss of funds, dishonored checks receivable. Unfortunately, they do rearrange some of the words, but the numbers correspond. All right, and then at the end of the page, we print our name, we sign, and we date. And that closes out the SF 1219. What questions do we have?
Would you mind backing up to slide 13 just for another 30 seconds or so, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. What
Thank
question
you.
do you have here?
I'm just frantically taking notes and I couldn't quite write that fast. I listen by note taking.
Okay. So for this one, our 6.2 alpha on our 2657 is our US currency coin on hand. And our 6.2 on the SF 1219 is our cash on hand. So those transfer over. Again, like our 7.3 on the 2657 is loss of funds, 7.3 on the SF 1219, losses of funds. 7.4 on the 2657, dishonored checks receivable. 7.4 on the SF 1219, receivable, dishonored check.
I believe I'm tracking. Thank you.
Awesome. Right, and then certification, we're printing, we're signing, and we're dating at the bottom. Now, in the instance when you're closing out the period and it's not the end of the month, so it's a turnover with a dispersing officer, you will have to write this exact statement on your SF 1219. So not only will it say final at the top, it'll have They'll say, I have received on whatever the date is by transfer from who you relieved, the amount of accountability, an analysis of which is included in sections 1 tac Bravo and 1 tac Charlie above. Pretty simple boilerplate that goes on there, but that is a portion of closing out your accountability. What questions do we have so far about the 1219? All right. So previously I mentioned that the SF1219 is just a summary of all the work you've done for the month, and it's auto-generated by NFRS. If you were to find an error after you had submitted this, you're not going to go back and correct it. You're going to figure out how to correct it throughout the following month and what you'll need to do. And so that correction will show up on your next SF1219. All right. And this SF1219 goes to DFAS. And you're going to send this off quarterly. And then also upon the relief of the disbursing officer. So you will mail this out quarterly. And you can also apparently email it. When I was on the ship, you were not able to email this. You had to mail in a physical copy. All right, so this closes out the SF1219 topic. Do we have any questions before we move on to discussion point 2? All right. Discussion point 2 is a message statement of accountability and report of collection of disbursements and collection. And if you go to page 90 in your red book, there is an example of what this looks like. And this is a very simple text format document that shows a quick summary of all the things that you have done throughout the accounting period. And this will be submitted with your returns. By a quick show of hands, who has their red book with them? Copy. It looks like we have one. All right. So if you don't have your red book in front of you, that's okay. I encourage you to go back through this section, and we're gonna. Section starts on page 84, and it runs through page 98. So pretty big section, but it breaks down. Okay. And you do too. Pretty big section, but it breaks down all the documents that we're looking at. Oh, that's a good point. I just assumed it was really easy on here to raise your hand. My apologies. All right, our next document that we're going to talk about is the schedule of deposit activity. And it is part of this 1219 message. So again, all these documents relate back and forth. And the system will not let you close out until the numbers match. But that does not mean your transactions are all correct. Oh, before we move on to the SOTA report, the schedule of deposit activities, it's important to note that all of our transactions on this form are going to have these category codes. So if you had a transaction, code 1, public vouchers, code 4, military paid rolls, code 7, collections, code 8, ship store collections when ship is in foreign waters. So if you look at page 90 in your book, at your disbursements and collections, so it's under the number 2, so it's towards the bottom of the page, you can see that there were 3 transactions that were public vouchers, 1 transaction that was a military payroll, and 3 collections.
Sir, can you repeat what page that was? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. That's page 90 in the red book.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem. All right. So if you move to page 91 in the red book, that is our schedule of deposit activity. This is a pretty good example of what you would see. It is a summary of everything that goes on line 4.2 of your SF 1219. Who can tell me what our line 4.2 is? And it's the same in the 2657 as it is on the SF 1219. So you can put it in the chat or you can shout it out. Okay, yeah, that is the dollar amount on that line. But I was just looking for, well, that's for our message of disbursements and collections. But on the form SF 1219 or the 2657, what is our line 4.2? What is it talking about there? The subject, not dollar amount.
Deposits presented or mailed to a bank.
Absolutely, it's our deposits. All right, so the schedule of deposit activity is just a summary of our deposits. As you can see on page 91, it's broken down into 4 sections. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide, and it breaks down those sections. So you can see section 20.1, 20.2, then 31, and 32. And this is for different classes of deposits. Your most common one that you're going to see is your section 20.1. And that simply means that you made a deposit this month and you have confirmation that it was deposited. Our 20.2 is you made a deposit this month, but you don't have confirmation that it was received. $31 is you deposited in a previous month, and now you received confirmation that it was received. And section 32 is a deposit that was reported in a previous month and not yet confirmed. I'm not sure. I can't think of a reason why you would have this nowadays. But in previous times, when you would be mailing off a bag of checks, it could probably take a while for that to be received and for it to be processed. So in operations today, typically you're going to see 20.1 because checks you're going to scan in and it's going to deposit those immediately. I would think the only exception to that is if you received a check early on the day that you're going to close out. And so you close out, maybe the bank hasn't received it yet, but that's the only situation I can think of where you're going to see 20.2 nowadays. What questions do we have about the schedule of deposit activity, also known as the SODA? All right, moving on. Detailed analysis of cash and other assets. If you turn to page 94 in the red book, you'll be able to see this one. And it is very simple. It is a summary of how much cash you have on hand typically, and your dishonored checks receivable. A notice above the cash that you have, it shows how much you're authorized to hold at personal risk. So what has a CO authorized that you can do business with each month? This is a Word document. You'll have one on hand. You'll fill this out every month. Do we have any questions there? Pretty simple form. It just lets DFAST see, hey, this is how much they have, and this is how much they're authorized. All right. Our next form is the SF 1179. It's our month-end check issue summary. Who can tell me what they think this one's going to be about?
These are the checks you issued during the month.
Absolutely. All right, so this is going to equal our 2.1 on our SF 1219, which corresponds to our 2.1 alpha and our 2.1 bravo on the 2657. So this is going to be the total checks that we issued out for vouchers or voucher transactions, as well as exchange for cash check. So it's going to be a grand total of all of those. But again, it's just a list of all the checks that we issued, no matter what their purpose. Oh, and this one is on page 92 in the red book. It has dispersing officer symbol number, our check symbol number, the check number, total dollar amount. Pretty straightforward. And it corresponds to the check issue transmittal, which can be found on page 93. And the difference is the 1179 is a simple form. It kind of gives an overview, whereas the month-end check issue summary gives a breakdown of each individual transaction. And it's a simple text file as well. So It's a lot easier to be submitted via message traffic or copy that over to message traffic. On the slide here, you'll see that it talks about issue day, check serial number, check amount. That's pretty much everything that's listed on there for those of you who cannot see the document. All right, moving on to our last discussion point is the distribution of the documents. Now, very important to know nowadays, especially, everything needs to be scanned into Facet. That is our scanning system that allows us to keep all documents digitally. In addition to that, quarterly, you'll need to submit these to DFAS. So you'll package up everything and you'll submit that to DFAS. So it's going to have, it's on the next, it's going to have a copy of the SF-1219, copy of the 1179, any certificates of destruction you have, SF-1034s, DD-1131s. So it's going to have all your supporting documentation. And you are going to keep the originals in your safe, and that is your retained return. Whenever you're shipping these off, you will label these that these are financial reports. It'll say for official business only. And it will say government financial reports due in DFAS Cleveland. And it'll say the date. And so you will have to generate that. You'll work with admin to have those pre-positioned and make sure that it leaves on time. So your admin personnel that through the DoD are able to ship USPS, no cost, as long as it's for official business. This slide is talking about your retained returns. Again, you're going to keep these in your safe. Includes copies of vouchers, your records, your logs, and it is required to be maintained in good condition and order. Your retained returns are what they come in and audit, and they will make sure that that matches what you submitted to DFAS. All right, a quick knowledge check. What document is submitted to show a summary of receipts and expenditures of public funds? It starts with an SF.
Is that the 1219?
Yeah, absolutely. The 1219. There are a few documents in here that also have this data. So it's definitely a confusing question without saying which form, I guess. But yes, the same information can be found on multiple forms. All right, how are disbursements and collections reported on the financial returns message report? So this is a little bit weird of a question too. So it's going back and talking about our text data file. And it's talking about the disbursements and collections on there. So that was on page 90 in section 2. And the important thing about these are broken down by category code. So they're reported based on category or type of transaction. All right. What document serves as a detailed report of deposits and debit vouchers? So what is our summary document for deposits?
Is that the schedule of deposit activity? No.
Uh, It is. And
Okay.
then what document is submitted to report a detail of all checks issued? That's our SF 1179. And that is our, well, it's a summary of all the checks that we issued. But it's called the month-end check issue summary. But that wraps up this evening's lesson. We only have a few seconds left. Do you all have any questions or any problems that you need to have addressed?